Picture this. It's the early hours of a chilly June morning in 1899. The Overland Flyer No. 1 train, laden with payroll cash and gold, is hurtling through the remote wilderness of Wyoming. Suddenly, the train screeches to a halt. The engineer has spotted something, an ominous barricade on the tracks. Within moments, masked figures emerge from the shadows, guns drawn, ready to pull off one of the most daring heists in the history of the American West. But who were these men that defied the law with such audacity? This is the story of the Wild Bunch, one of the most infamous outlaw gangs to ever roam the American frontier. Led by the notorious Butch Cassidy and the sharpshooting Sundance Kid, this loosely organized group of renegades became legendary for their daring bank and train robberies. But their tale is more than just a series of heists. It's a complex saga of personal histories, rebellion against authority, and the enduring mythology of the Wild West. Chapter 1. Formation of the Wild Bunch. The Wild Bunch wasn't your typical tightly knit gang. They were a collection of outlaws brought together by a shared disdain for the law and the lure of quick riches. Their roots trace back to the chaotic aftermath of the Civil War, a time when the American West was transforming rapidly. As railroads crisscrossed the frontier, once lawless territories began to fall under the control of federal and local authorities. Cowboys, ranch hands, and drifters, many of whom had thrived in the old ways, found themselves out of work, their way of life slipping away. For some, turning to crime wasn't just a choice, it was a means of survival. The end of the open range and the rise of corporate ranching left many young men with little hope for the future. For them, joining forces with like-minded outlaws offered not only financial gain, but also a chance to strike back at a world that had left them behind. Chapter 2. Key members of the Wild Bunch. At the heart of the Wild Bunch were a few key figures, each bringing their own unique skills and baggage to the gang. Butch Cassidy, born Robert Leroy Parker, wasn't always destined for a life of crime. Born into a devout Mormon family in Utah in 1866, Cassidy was the eldest of 13 children. But despite his religious upbringing, the allure of the outlaw life proved too strong. By his teenage years, he had left home, working as a cowboy across Utah and Colorado. His first brush with crime was a small one, stealing a pair of jeans, but it wasn't long before he moved on to bigger heists, becoming the mastermind behind some of the West's most infamous bank and train robberies. Cassidy's charm, intelligence, and natural leadership made him a central figure among the Wild Bunch. Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, better known as the Sundance Kid, was another crucial player in the Wild Bunch. Born in Pennsylvania in 1867, Sundance's early life was relatively uneventful until he made his way west, hungry for adventure. His first major run-in with the law came when he was jailed for horse theft in Sundance, Wyoming, a crime that earned him his notorious nickname. A skilled marksman, Sundance quickly became a feared member of the gang. His partnership with Butch Cassidy was legendary, their bond of friendship as strong as their combined criminal prowess. William Carver, nicknamed News for his frequent appearances in newspapers, was another key member of the gang. Born in Texas in 1868, Carver came from a ranching background but eventually drifted into a life of crime. Known for his violent tendencies, Carver was instrumental in planning and executing many of the Wild Bunch's robberies. His romance with fellow outlaw Laura Bullion added a personal dimension to his criminal activities, making him one of the more complex figures in the gang. Then there was Harvey Logan, better known as Kid Curry. Born in Iowa in 1867, Logan was one of the most feared members of the Wild Bunch, notorious for his quick temper and deadly aim. After losing his parents, Logan and his brothers turned to crime, making a name for themselves as ruthless outlaws. Kid Curry was responsible for several killings, including the deaths of lawmen who tried and failed to bring him to justice. His violent streak made him a valuable, yet dangerous, member of the gang. Standing over 6 feet tall, Ben Kilpatrick, known as the Tall Texan, was an imposing figure both in stature and in reputation. Born in Texas in 1874, Kilpatrick turned to crime at a young age, starting with horse theft. His size and strength made him a trusted enforcer within the Wild Bunch, participating in several of their most daring train robberies. His loyalty to Butch Cassidy and the gang was unwavering, making him a crucial part of their operations. Elzie Lay. Elzie Lay, born in Ohio in 1868, was one of Cassidy's closest friends and a key strategist within the gang. Unlike many of his fellow outlaws, Lay came from a relatively affluent background and was well educated. Despite his advantages, he chose a life of crime, becoming involved in some of the Wild Bunch's most notorious heists. His role as a planner and strategist was invaluable, particularly during the gang's early years. And then there was Laura Bullion, often referred to as the Rose of the Wild Bunch. Born in Texas in 1876, Bullion was the daughter of a Native American mother and a German father. She was romantically involved with several members of the gang, including Ben Kilpatrick and William Carver. But Bullion was more than just a companion. She actively participated in the gang's criminal enterprises, helping to fence stolen goods and even taking part in some robberies. Her involvement highlights the important, though often overlooked, roles that women played in the outlaw world. Chapter 3. The Wild Bunch's Life of Crime. The Wild Bunch didn't just rob banks and trains for the money, though the financial rewards were certainly part of it. Their criminal activities were also driven by a deep distrust of authority, a desire for revenge against a system they felt had wronged them, and the allure of the outlaw lifestyle. Law enforcement was often seen as corrupt, and the railroads and banks as symbols of Eastern greed. Robbing these institutions wasn't just a crime, it was an act of rebellion against a system they believed had marginalized them. The Wild Bunch's exploits can be seen as part of a larger resistance against the forces that sought to tame the Wild West. The economic conditions of the time played a significant role in pushing these men toward a life of crime. With the open range closing and large corporate ranches taking over, many cowboys and ranch hands found themselves out of work. Robbing banks and trains offered a quick, albeit dangerous, way to make a living. But there was also something deeper at play, a romanticized notion of what it meant to be an outlaw. The Wild West was already steeped in the mythology of the outlaw as a symbol of resistance and independence. Stories of Jesse James and the Younger Brothers had captured the public imagination, turning criminals into folk heroes. For the Wild Bunch, these stories weren't just entertainment, they were inspiration. The idea of standing up against corrupt authorities and living by their own rules was as alluring as the money they stole. Chapter 4. Notable Crimes of the Wild Bunch. The Wild Bunch carried out a series of audacious robberies that captivated the public and cemented their place in Western folklore. The Castle Gate Robbery, 1897. One of their early successes was the Castle Gate Robbery in Utah on April 21, 1897. Butch Cassidy and Elzie Lay led the gang in ambushing the Pleasant Valley Coal Company payroll clerk and made off with over $7,000, a fortune at the time. The robbery was notable for its meticulous planning, a hallmark of Cassidy's leadership, and set the stage for even bolder heists. The Montpelier Bank Robbery, 1896. On August 13, 1896, Cassidy, Lay, and Bob Meeks struck again, this time at the Bank of Montpelier in Idaho. The gang made off with over $7,000 in cash and gold, further solidifying their reputation as daring outlaws. This heist demonstrated their growing boldness and skill, as well as their ability to elude capture. But the most infamous of their heists was the Wilcox Train Robbery, which took place on June 2, 1899, near Wilcox, Wyoming. This daring operation targeted the Union Pacific Railroad's Overland Flyer No. 1, a train known to carry valuable shipments including payrolls and gold. The meticulous planning and audacity of this heist would make it one of the most famous in the history of the American West. It was a masterclass in outlaw strategy and execution. By 1899, the Wild Bunch was already a household name across the American West. Their leader, Butch Cassidy, was known as a cunning strategist who preferred to avoid unnecessary violence, while his close associate, the Sundance Kid, was renowned for his sharpshooting skills. The Union Pacific Railroad, a prime target for the gang, regularly transported large sums of money, gold, and other valuables across the country, often with minimal security in remote regions. The Wild Bunch selected the Overland Flyer No. 1, which ran from Omaha, Nebraska to San Francisco, California. This train was known to carry a significant amount of money, including payrolls for railroad workers and gold shipments destined for the West Coast. The gang chose a remote location near Wilcox, Wyoming, for the robbery. This area, characterized by rugged terrain and isolation, was ideal for their purposes. They specifically targeted a wooden trestle bridge at Wilcox Pass, which spanned a deep gorge, a location that offered natural cover and a strategic vantage point. In the days leading up to the heist, the Wild Bunch gathered supplies, including dynamite and fresh horses, to facilitate their escape. They also familiarized themselves with the train's schedule and the surrounding area. Suspicious activity was reported, but these reports were dismissed until it was too late. In the early hours of June 2, 1899, the Wild Bunch sprang into action. Under the cover of darkness, they moved into position near the trestle bridge at Wilcox Pass, using railroad ties and wooden timbers to create a barricade on the tracks. At approximately 2:18 a.m., the Overland Flyer No. 1 approached the trestle bridge. The train's engineer, seeing the obstruction, applied the brakes, bringing the train to a halt. As the train stopped, the Wild Bunch emerged from the shadows, guns drawn, and quickly surrounded the train. Their first task was to separate the passenger cars from the express and baggage cars. They had no interest in robbing the passengers, as this would only slow them down and increase the risk of confrontation. Instead, they focused on the express car, where they knew the most valuable cargo was stored. The express car was guarded by Charles Woodcock, an express messenger for the Union Pacific Railroad. Woodcock, aware of the danger, barricaded himself inside the car and refused to open the door, forcing the outlaws to resort to their backup plan: dynamite. The Wild Bunch placed a stick of dynamite on the hinges of the express car's door and lit the fuse. The explosion was powerful enough to blow the door off its hinges, creating a large hole in the car. Despite the force of the blast, Woodcock miraculously survived, although he was badly shaken. With access to the car's interior, the gang quickly set about looting its contents. Inside, they found several safes, one of which contained the bulk of the Union Pacific's payroll. However, the main safe, made of heavy steel, was more challenging to open than anticipated. Unwilling to waste time, they placed another charge of dynamite on the safe and detonated it. The second explosion was even more powerful, blowing the safe open, but also destroying much of its contents. Banknotes were shredded, and gold coins were scattered across the car. The outlaws gathered what they could, stuffing cash, gold, and other valuables into bags. The exact value of the loot taken during the Wilcox Train Robbery is estimated at around $50,000, an enormous sum at the time, equivalent to over $1.5 million today. Despite the destruction caused by the dynamite, the robbery was a financial success for the gang. However, the unsigned banknotes presented a challenge, as they were difficult to launder without attracting attention. With the loot secured, the Wild Bunch knew they had little time before the authorities were alerted. They executed a well-rehearsed escape plan, splitting into smaller groups and heading in different directions to confuse pursuers. This tactic was typical of the Wild Bunch, who often used the vast, rugged terrain of the West to their advantage. One group, including Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, headed south toward the Hole in the Wall, a remote hideout in the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming. The hole in the wall was a notorious outlaw refuge, well hidden and difficult for law enforcement to penetrate. It was here that the gang would regroup and lay low until the heat from the robbery had subsided. Another group, including Kid Curry and Ben Kilpatrick, headed west, further dispersing the trail. Each group had fresh horses stashed along their routes, ensuring they could maintain a fast pace and stay ahead of any pursuers. As news of the robbery spread, the Union Pacific Railroad, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, and local law enforcement launched a massive manhunt. The Pinkertons, who had been tracking the Wild Bunch for years, intensified their efforts to apprehend the gang. They followed leads, interviewed witnesses, and placed informants in towns where the outlaws were known to operate. Despite their best efforts, the Wild Bunch managed to stay one step ahead. Charles Woodcock's account of the robbery, detailing the gang's calm demeanor and efficiency, helped law enforcement piece together the events of that night. However, it did little to narrow down the search for the elusive outlaws. But like all legends, the Wild Bunch's reign couldn't last forever. As lawmen closed in and the West grew tamer, Butch, Sundance, and their crew slowly faded from the spotlight. But their story doesn't end here. What really happened to them after they fled to Argentina? And how did it all come crashing down? In Part 2, we'll dive into the fate of each member and uncover the true story behind their downfall. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments if you're excited for Part 2. This is actually my first video, so I'd love to hear your feedback and any tips on how I can improve. And of course, if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who loves these incredible tales from the Wild West. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.